Joining us now, a very special guest, the director and producer of a documentary about the Parkland shooting, Stefano Da Fre. The film is called The Day I Had to Grow Up. Stefano, of course, thank you for joining us today to talk about what's happened. Let me just jump right in and ask you first, are you surprised that Nikolas Cruz entered a guilty plea to all of these charges?
I don't think so at all. No, I was not surprised. I mean, there's a surmountable amount of obviously evidence, and the question is not whether he's going to be guilty or not. The question is going to be whether the state is going to pursue capital punishment, which I believe is what they're going to do. The only recourse that the defense has is basically to try to serve out these 17 lifetime counts in jail. So I was not surprised.
All right, so we do know that the state, at least at this point in time, that the death penalty is on the table versus life in prison, and that the aggravating factors the state would have to show likely exist, and the defendant has an opportunity to present mitigating information. But Stefano, I really want to use your expertise and tell us a little bit about your personal connection to this school and why you initially chose to do a documentary.
You know, close friends of mine went to that school. I grew up in Coral Springs, where he was found. And many of my close friends over the years went to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. I got to be very close with the Helena Ramsey family, and Helena Ramsey was one of the victims that was killed. And so we decided, myself and Laura Pellegrini decided to do a documentary honoring this individual and so many of the other people who are just lost in the news shuffle. Helena Ramsey's story, other people's story, obviously Andrew Pollock, who is so representative of Meadow, his daughter, who passed away. We did our film, The Day I Had to Grow Up, to talk about activists, people who survived the Parkland shooting, and how their lives were changed for the rest of their lives, and how they could turn that experiences of being survivors at Parkland to a positive way of becoming activists and bringing some good into the world. And you know, so it affected us on a personal level. And you know, we dedicated 4 years of, you know, almost 4 years of my life as soon as it happened in 2018.
Stefano, amazing work, because the other thing, regrettably, is often, I think, as time goes by, people remember the name of the suspect or the convicted murderer, but they forget about the families, the names, the people that are the victims, and this will help do that. So one of the burning questions I have for you, knowing that you have gotten to know these families of these victims of this massacre, is we heard that, you know, several of these family members have spoken out and clearly said, we want the death penalty for Nikolas Cruz. Now that he's pleaded guilty, we want the death penalty. Do you believe, after meeting with these families, that there are any of the victims' families that truly want mercy, that do believe he should have a life sentence versus the death penalty imposed?
I think when I meet with the families, and I've talked to many of them, that it falls on their religious beliefs. It falls on their beliefs about compassion, about ethics, about their values of God, about what they think is the right thing. I cannot even imagine being a parent to lose a child just at the beginning of your life in such a horrific way. And I think that all of them are doing their best to find some form of solace, to grieve in a proper way. I think that, you know, there's never going to be a decider of whether, you know, that's why it's up to the state. You know, it's almost in a sense, that's the way the legal system is set up. It's almost right for it to be set up for the state, because I think the state has to pursue it to the extent of the law in the way that they see fit, given the laws in Florida and in Broward County. There's going to be discrepancies in different families. Everybody grieves differently, and everyone's grievances are valid.
Right. And Stefano, you've made such a great point, which is you have to look at the law of the state and the facts of the case for the state to decide how to move forward. And again, you're right, for every family, for every victim in this case, to find any way they can find peace, if that's possible, after this type of, again, horrific massacre. All right, Stefano, we've also heard from some of the victims' families today. Andrew Pollock, the father of Meadow Pollock, spoke to our own Ted Rollins earlier, and the father of Luke Hoyer spoke right after the hearing. Let's listen to those together so I can then have your opinion, please.
I don't care if they hang this thing in town square or light him on fire with gasoline, or he gets death by lethal injection is really easy. But so that, I'm not against the death penalty. I don't really care what happens to this thing. But, if they put him in prison, I think the quicker he goes to prison, the quicker we'll be reading about him in the paper one day that he's been beat to death with some pipes like Jeffrey Dahmer was.
I'm just looking for justice here, and justice for us is, we want him dead, we want him forgotten. I don't ever want to hear this kid's name again after all this is over.
And he just described justice for us. To your point, each family may have a different view of what justice is. So are you surprised, and tell us a little bit more about the families and what you've learned and share in your documentary about the families in this?
Well, you see it in my documentary. In the documentary, The Day I Had to Grow Up, you see the story of Helena Ramsey and how she shielded two individuals with books, literally books from bullets, to save their lives. And then we see the effects of the family members and their friends that are passing on their memory and their legacy of how that's had a change to their activism. Andrew Pollock is a great example. His daughter Meadow passed away. He was a very instrumental activist in one of the public safety measures. I believe it was the School Public Safety Act that they enacted in Florida and in Broward County, and was an activist who used this opportunity to do well. Now, when he talks about lead pipes and how he wants justice, we have to have compassion. None of us have been in the shoes, and what they want is to put an end for this. This has been 4 years of torture for these parents. And for them, if they feel that having justice served is enacting the death penalty, that's something that's going to bring closure to them, then, it's very hard for us who are on the outside to pass any kind of judgment, whether it's legal or otherwise. It's just for us to help that justice is served.
And let's talk, if we could shift a little bit to the community, because we know nationwide this rocked everyone, because it's a parent's worst nightmare. And so all of a sudden, a place where people thought they could be safe in their school became not safe. How is the community dealing with this 4 years later, and the repercussions to the school? How are they moving on in spite of this?
Well, we've noticed from the recommendations that they've had, and similar to Andrew Pollock's work and a lot of other local officials and other activists, in terms of filing for code reds, being available to making sure students. The sad part about the Nikolas Cruz case is that there were complaints on him before. It's just along the food chain, along going to the top, nobody actually made sure that this guy was pulled out of the system. So strengthening the ability that we have to prevent this, in seeing people that are not well, that already have symptoms of mental issues and have already talk to people about doing premeditated school shootings and are writing these things on social media, we have to remain vigilant. I know that here in Florida, with my parents, with my family, my friends that went to Marjory Stoneman Douglas, they are still afraid. There is not a day that goes by that people are not afraid, that say to themselves, it could still happen. So I don't know if it's a question of time. I don't know if it's necessarily legislation that will help. Metal detectors as well that have been enacted in these schools, but there have to be practical steps on the first part, and there has to be some healing for time to go by as well. The two of them have to work simultaneously. It's not just one or the other.
Completely agree with you, and I have to say I'm a child welfare law specialist and as such deal with these issues on a daily basis, and I have to emphasize what you said. I believe education is prevention. What do I mean by that? People need to realize, look for the red flags, listen, get that person help, pull them out of the system, do what's needed so we can prevent these types of things to get people the help they need in this case. So I just really want to underscore that. Stefano, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us for the documentary, for bringing light to the issues that exist for these families becoming activists in this case. Stefano, we really appreciate your time, Da Fre, here today. We are going to need to squeeze in a break.